Well, good morning. Um, welcome to our second session today, your second session, today. Now representing myself directly, Sun King. And I want to speak a little bit today with you about a very important point. It's captured in a phrase that was actually from a literary source, Milan Kundera's book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The thing that is so difficult for many of you who would choose to fulfill your function as a portal through which this energetic power that I represent as Sun King, it's very challenging. Especially because most body and person that become willing haven't necessarily had as much preparation. Remember what I had shared through Louis before, the process of genius, the process of expression, high-level expression, takes these 4 stages: preparation, incubation, illumination, and expression. And the preparation would obviously be the most difficult. So in my process of grooming Louis for his function, it was a long and often difficult process, and I can detail more of that as we go along. But it's very challenging for the person, body, device to become empty enough. And I know this is what Louis shared a lot about, his process of repeated devastations, which of course orchestrated by me for his benefit or my benefit, for him to become a useful channel, portal, conduit. It was necessary that he would eliminate as much of the interference patterns as possible. Some interference patterns are tribal, so I basically arranged with his soul to incarnate into a family that would totally abandon and betray him. So he didn't have that much of that tribal interference pattern that many have. Many can't choose to fully fulfill their function because of tribal concerns. So I think by the time Louis received his initial download, big download, I mean, there were a few earlier. I started in his teens, but the big download came when he was 22. And, again, it was very difficult for him because of his egoic structure to deal with this information. He, like most, misunderstood the function, somehow taking it personally. And this is again what the ego would do, would interpret this energetic call as something personal, personal, because that's what a person does. Ego represents the person. So along the way, Louis struggled greatly trying to assimilate this function, this destiny, and describing again the unbearable lightness of being that many, Louis, like many before him, would almost seemingly choose to destroy himself rather than fulfill this function because it seems so impossible. Again, this lightness of being that I represent is unbearable, okay, to the body, the person. We saw this represented quite some time ago in the form of Jesus, that he could only manage to stay on the planet 33 years because it was so unbearable, if not for him, for those around him. Okay. The times were very dense then, and so he had to be crucified. He had to be, well, and again, the whole story of him being martyred, whether that was true or not, I'm not so sure. You've certainly misinterpreted much of what he represented, because really the crucifixion was not the point. The point was the resurrection, to basically show that there is no death at this level that I'm speaking from. Of course, there is no death. It represents the eternal. So this is part of what initially I came to Louis to offer instruction. And I remember one kind of cute story, because I basically was giving him this information that, you are invincible, you are indestructible. Of course, I wasn't really meaning you, the person. What I was really pointing toward, and the voice always points toward the reality, which again is not the person, the body. But of course, the body, the person, would interpret it that way. So I remember as a teenager feeding this information, he got this idea that, wow, his family went skiing all the time in Vermont. And he had this idea that I can't be hurt. I'm invincible. So I can take these new skis that I bought. He bought a pair of Hart Javelin skis that were one of the first metal fiberglass hybrid skis guaranteed for life against breakage. And so he had this crazy idea that he would crank his bindings down super tight, so when he had a fall, the skis wouldn't come off. This is the days before the brakes that would stop a ski from running away, before even they had the straps to tie the skis to the boot. Anyway, the point is he was tempted, okay, to try this idea, to explore this possibility that he was indestructible. So he would go up the lift line a little further each time and then bomb straight down until he had a great crash. His skis not coming off. So eventually what happened, one of these crashes, a very violent crash, he actually flipped and both tips of the skis went into the snow and both of the skis snapped, they broke. Instead of his legs breaking, his legs should have broken. Well, guess what? This is kind of the fun story from my perspective of me on several occasions protecting him, right? What people will call like a miracle is simply protection from the higher self that would stop his legs from breaking, allow the skis to break, the whole thing be orchestrated, again, as a demonstration. Okay, and he's 14, 15 years old. I remember just sticking with the same subject. He went on a ski trip to Jackson Hole, Wyoming in his senior year of high school. So he was 17. And he had his new Hart Javelin skis, of course, that he'd gotten as a result of breaking the other pair. So he went with two buddies, and the two buddies were more or less intermediate skiers, and they wanted to stay in the easier area, and Louis was quite accomplished. So he went off on his own, and he went up on the main mountain, the big mountain, up the tram. And there was a section, they were getting a lot of snow up on the top of the mountain, and they would periodically rope off sections because of avalanche danger. And then they had teams of people that would shoot guns into the avalanches to detonate like a small bomb that would release the avalanche and take away the danger. Anyway, there had just been a very heavy snow, and an area had not been yet treated with these explosives, so it was still roped off danger, do not enter, avalanche danger. And so again, because Louis had this screw loose in his brain because of my influence, he said, well, I'll just go through the line. He's by himself in deep powder, going into an avalanche area. And of course, I'm watching him going, okay, here we go. So I trigger the avalanche, but it only goes a few meters, and I stop it just to give him that fright, right? To scare him a little bit. So just guiding him along the way. Anyway, it was the first devastation that I helped orchestrate for him was filling him probably as a 14, 15-year-old with this idea that he might want to become an Air Force pilot like his father. And so he applied and was accepted at the Air Force Academy. And so this was the first devastation to send him there, totally out of his league, 17 years old, and showing up at this military academy where the whole point was they were going to make you or they were going to break you. And of course, in Louis' case, they broke him. And that first summer, again, with me observing, he going through survival training, he had to do boxing and wrestling and intramurals. They had to do Army games, and he was a mess. But the worst part was when the academic year started and he was actually comfortable in that environment. But he something had to shift in his brain, right? Because that was not his destiny to become an Air Force fighter pilot. So I remember when he came back home to visit for the first time at Christmas break, he spent time with his little sister, and she was a little hippie girl, and smoking marijuana and hanging out with other druggies. And Louis thought his sister was going off the deep end. Couldn't understand her at all. Why would she be acting this way, doing these things, smoking marijuana, and probably other drugs as well? Anyway, there was something in his brain that had to shift, right? He was not going to become a military man. He had other things to do with his life. So flipped a little switch in his brain. By the end of that 10 days, he was smoking marijuana with his sister. He thought the military was crazy. He went back to the school and got into a series of he just kind of refused to comply with the military rules, and he got in increasing levels of trouble and ended up getting expelled at the end of his first year. So again, guiding it's so fascinating, and from my perspective, seeing because what I see representing the eternal, the whole point was Louis sitting here, his body and person sitting here, being more or less a perfect vehicle for me, because I destroyed all of his interference patterns. He was destroyed at the tribal level, destroyed at the egoic level. So again, this is kind of the point. And one of the things that I would mention is a few other portals that I know influenced Louis in his journey were represented by, there's three of them that I kind of picked out for today's talk. Alan Watts, Choyam Trungpa, and Rajneesh Osho. Okay, these three individual portals represented what would call to Louis via the school in San Francisco. And this was, again, a big part of his destiny, was to go to this school. I'll tell you why later, but Alan Watts actually influenced the formation of the school, the California Institute of Asian Studies. But Alan Watts, who really represented Taoism and Zen, Choyam Trungpa, who represented Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala Buddhism, and Rajneesh Osho, who really pretty much represented himself. He was a high-level Indian guru. Okay, so all three of these individuals were very high-level channels, portals, conduits through which the energetic principle that I am as Sun King, each of them had their own higher selves that were representing this truth. And they did a beautiful job representing it, but at the same time, as individuals, they struggled greatly, okay? Because of this, the energy, the unbearable lightness of being, those who channel, those who are used in a powerful way as messengers, they tend to suffer at the individual personal body level. All three of them had big issues with drugs and alcohol. All three of them died at a very early age. Alan Watts, 58, Trungpa, 48, Osho, 59. So again, there's this, remember it mentioned in the first talk about Eros and Thanatos, okay? This powerful life energy that would fill one with this beautiful evolutionary message is in this dynamic battle with Thanatos, which is a death wish, okay? The need to get out. You could say that the soul responds to the call to serve the higher level. So Louis' soul, okay, was willing to basically give Louis to me, okay, the higher self. And the soul isn't really the higher self. We can talk more about that later. The soul is very much connected to the karma. And of course, I represent something way beyond karma, way beyond the limitations of time and space and bodies and persons and all that. So you have the sort of these three levels. Okay, there's Louis, the body person, Louis' soul that was willing to answer the call, and then Sun King, the name that he chose. Well, I orchestrated his choice of the name Sun King. These three levels, and this is why, again, I would say that Louis talked about this, and we just passed 333 a.m. Okay, 333 is a powerful portal, okay, because it represents something very real. Okay, three levels of consciousness. Louis talked about this: tribal, egoic, and spiritual. Okay, so and you could say in some way what I just mentioned. Louis, the person body with a soul, his more or less connection to eternity, and then me, Sun King, which is actual representation of eternity. Very powerful, unbearable lightness of being. So this is why in Louis' grooming, okay, the teacher, I know that he's mentioned, Claire Ludlow, his first teacher of A Course in Miracles, gave him this very simple sort of mantra: pray to stay small. Okay, the ideal for any channel is to be invisible. And this is what channels used to do. Channels, like the channel of Ramtha, channel of Seth, channel of Emmanuel, channel of A Course in Miracles. Actually, Helen Schuckman, she suffered greatly with her transmission when I was Sun King, but the greater I am, that represented itself as Jesus. Jesus would be my another, if you say there's the light, the light, which is pure white, breaks into seven dimensions, the 7 colors of the rainbow, if you think of it like light. And so there's more or less 7 aspects of that light. And so one of them, represented as Jesus, came through historically, came through more recently via A Course in Miracles. And Helen, who channeled the Jesus aspect of what I am, struggled greatly. It really was very, very difficult for her, because she just couldn't really accept a lot of what was being taught, was being spoken. She was a good scribe, because she would write down everything verbatim, but she did run interference patterns. And so a lot of A Course in Miracles is a little bit confusing and misunderstood because of Helen. It wasn't my intention, or I shouldn't say me, but our intention. Course in Miracles really is the correction to the original sin of Christianity, of misunderstanding the basic message. And we'll get into that more later. But anyway, Claire, she said to Louis, pray to stay small. And again, this would be something that I would help him with, because he would be tempted, like any ego, he would be tempted, right? When you feel this power moving through you, it's very easy to be tempted, whether it's for fame or fortune or sex or whatever, to use the power for personal gain. Okay, and you see many, I mean, almost every there's a lot of, how do you say this? I mean, there are a lot of individuals who at a very low level channel, but there's so much overlay of their own personal stuff that what comes through them is not very clean. It's not very, it's tainted. A good example, just using Course in Miracles, would be Gary Renard taking this information and just basically making up a whole story, fictitious entities, Arten and Persa and all that. So he paid the price for that. When people do that, they suffer greatly, because they know they're lying. They know that they're sometimes people get a direct message and it just comes through their filter in a way that's not very clean. But Gary just made up stuff. I mean, he knew that he was doing that. So there are a lot of phony people out there that are pretending to represent me, represent the I am, but it's not really true. Anyway, so for Louis to become a very useful, staying small would be really important. So for example, he was a very good writer, but 3 different times I had to interfere so his writing contract would disappear. It was not going to be his destiny to become a published famous author or it was very, very important that he would stay as close to invisible as possible. I mean, that's the highest level master that could walk the earth would be invisible, because he or she would have zero interest in recognition, zero interest in fame or fortune or whatever. So like any egoic structure, I mean, Louis had to have a strong ego in order to survive. Okay, so remember, in this battle between these forces, survival would be beneficial, if only because usually as the being becomes more and more mature, he or she becomes more and more useful because they've survived all the storms that the ego and, in battle with the divine would initiate. But then it comes to a point where the ego is far enough along, or the being is far enough along, where the ego just naturally, through devastations, but also through a natural evolution, the ego just becomes less dominant. When individuals are older, they're much more comfortable with death, much more comfortable with this process of emptying, surrendering. The feminine, you can take a man, his ego is stronger, of course, when he's young. And it's just generally part of a male evolution, is that he becomes more and more feminine, more and more open, receptive as he ages. So I wanted to mention this one quote that also comes from A Course in Miracles that really, again, defines what we're talking about, this journey. It's a very powerful message that I, in the flavor of Jesus, spoke. So there's several messages like this, because again, we'll talk more about A Course in Miracles. I mean, it is the closest thing that's been written that comes to the completion of this evolution that you humans are experiencing, in the form of embodying the divine. This is the whole point of removing the egoic denial and projection of your divinity and allowing it to become one with you. So this is again what Louis accomplished. What he would allow me, Sun King, to eventually merge with him, and he would allow his divinity to actually take over, assume control. And that's what's happened today. It's what's happening here in this moment. His divinity, Sun King, is now in control of his person and his body. Okay, so the line, this is a great line. The physical appearance of temptation becomes spiritual recognition of salvation. Okay. Physical appearance of temptation becomes the spiritual recognition of salvation. So this is what we'll spend more time with this, because this I'll demonstrate via this story of my co-creation and grooming of Louis as a device, that the temptations that would attract the body and the ego, okay, as they're overcome, becomes evidence. Okay, you can say spiritual recognition would be evidence of salvation. Okay, so this is actually what's going on now for you at the species level. Okay, there are these two forces that are representing themselves on the planet. There's always been these two forces that appear to be opposing each other. And each of you is going to be given, is being given this temptation. Each of you individually and you collectively are given this temptation to choose. Okay, so what I'm offering to you is that your divinity, individually and collectively, your divinity is calling you through me, Sun King. I am your divinity. You will give it a different name, but I am your divinity, calling you to answer the call, to receive, to accept your salvation. Okay? The salvation of you individually and your planet. You know, it's not the Christian give yourself to Jesus salvation. You could say it's similar, but it's not about Jesus. It's about you. It's not about you saying, oh, I'm a sinner and I just give my life to Jesus and I'm saved. Okay, it's a different variation of this same idea, but it's actually you realizing that all of your temptations has been a part of you that would simply resist this unbearable lightness of being. It's so unbelievable. You see, this is why, again, in Louis' example, you see that there have been these maybe half a dozen devastations that would break down that mental resistance, the egoic resistance to the light. Okay? The ego does not want the light. Okay? It shatters, it shatters what the ego is defending. The ego is trying to defend this idea that you're a separate, lonely, angry individual. Okay, that's ego's job, is to protect that. It might seem crazy, but it's very important. And you'll see eventually, if you hang in there with me, you'll see eventually why the body and the person, once they're fully given over to this function, they become holy, they become beautiful. There's nothing wrong with the body. There's nothing wrong with the person. This is where, again, most spiritual teachers that are totally tainted by morality or whatever will try to teach that there's something wrong with the body. There's something wrong with the ego, the person. It's not actually true. It's just that when the body and the person are drawn by temptation, they get stuck. They get bogged down with whether it's drugs and alcohol or sex or money or power, the things that tempt the egoic structure. You could even say at the soul level, there's temptation. You know, the soul, again, is that part of you that's drawn, it's connected to the divine, but it's still very human, working out karmic shit. Okay, so, but again, the whole point of this story of Louis is that his temptations, that I gave him every temptation that a human can be given, and in some cases he followed those. I mean, when his first download came and he heard his destiny for this, what he's doing today, he saw this. He saw his, he didn't call it Sun King, but he saw his higher self. He saw his illuminated, you know, he's 22 years old. And, you know, he had this emissary, this woman that I had chosen for him, Rena Surkar. She's a beautiful, she might still be on the planet today. Haven't kept track, but tapped her to be the one to give him this message about his destiny, the brow of David, and this greatness that wanted to use him. Okay, but he would struggle. He would think, oh, there's something special about me. There's something great about me. No, that's exactly wrong. That's the opposite of what is true. The whole point that he would learn is that there's nothing great about you except that you said yes, that you were willing to walk this very long, difficult path to one day be of service. You know, it took him several decades, 4 actually, to get from that point to this point where he could actually finally be useful without taking himself too seriously, without thinking that I, Sun King, am him. He's not Sun King. Sun King is not human. Sun King is not. Sun King is a representation of the eternal, the timeless realm, using the human body and person as its communication device. It's a very simple thing. 333. 333. meditate on that number 333. That speaks to your relationship with the divine, your relationship with the earth, your function, which is your happiness. It's everything. Okay, so I think that's enough for today. Sun King sending great blessings. Listen, pay attention. You will, this, I promise that this message will bring you into your full flowering, your full freedom, your full happiness, the whole shebang. It's a choice. Burp, burp.